Dreams Come From is a podcast featuring successful people from around the world who have pursued their dreams to arrive at a station in life. I'm your host, Sanjeev Chatterjee. I'm a professor of cinema and journalism, and in my creative life, I make documentary films. I started this podcast to explore what it takes for people to follow their dreams, even while being true to who they are, at least who they believe they are. Trained as an engineer at the Indian Institutes of Technology, or IIT, my guest, Rahul Banerjee, gave up the securities of an Indian middle-class life to serve his country. He threw his lot behind the indigenous Bhil tribal folk in central India. Along the way, he has completed a PhD, become an Ashoka Fellow, and completed numerous research projects for organizations internationally. But the central focus, as Banerjee explains, has been a lifelong process of unlearning and then organizing to secure constitutional rights for the poorest of the poor in India. This conversation is a snapshot of that journey. Rahul Banerjee, welcome to Where Dreams Come From. You were born in Calcutta?
Yeah.
And I would love to hear a little bit about your early memories of growing up in that city.
I was in Calcutta from 65 onwards, when I was 5 years old. In the 70s, when I became a little bit more conscious of what's going on. That was the time, early 70s, when the Naxal movement was going on.
For the benefit of the audience, could you briefly explain what the Naxal movement or the Naxalite movement was all about?
The Naxalites in India were, the formal name was Communist Party of India, Marxist-Leninists. And they were advocates of the Maoist line, saying that, India is mostly peasants, so you will have to have a peasant revolution. They formed these armed squads and all that in various areas, and then they came into the urban areas also. And they were called Naxalites because the first uprising of these people took place in a village called Naxalbari in North Bengal. But basically their thing was that to overthrow the state has to be overthrown, but it has to be done by the peasant masses.
Thank you for that clarification. You went to fairly elite institutions in your high school as well as in your college. Is that a departure for you in terms of what you did later in life?
The school that I studied in La Martiniere, so that I come from a upper middle class family. So I went to that school. The school itself, whatever it taught and all that, that is a different thing altogether. But because of this Naxal movement, there's a different influence that is outside the school. I used to think about all these things, First there was the Naxal movement, which, because it was an armed struggle, a small kind of thing, that was crushed. But after that, there was the Jayaprakash Narayan, who brought about that Sampurna Kranti Andolan, which is a mass movement, which is the biggest mass movement that has been there in India after independence. And the background to that was that the economy was going down, tanking. The GDP of India, it was a negative GDP. And there was inflation also. So both negative GDP and inflation, that had an effect on the poor. And so you had this massive mass movement. And then that was, as a counter to that, Indira Gandhi brought in emergency, suppression of civil rights. And for 2 years, there was suppression of civil rights and all that. All these things happened at that time, which had an impact on me, that made me question as to what was going on. So even though I studied in an elite school, that was countered by this. The other thing is that why did I go to an elite institution like IIT, to become an engineer? In our own family, for 2 or 3 generations, we have had engineers. My grandfathers, then father and uncles and all that, most of them are engineers.
I've read that you actually met a tribal man driving a bullock cart while you were in IIT, which seems to be a turning point.
Yeah, actually it's part of a larger story. The thing is that after joining IIT, from 3rd year onwards, I began having doubts about, the course itself. Near the IIT, there are these villages which are populated by tribes, scheduled tribe people, indigenous people. So we used to go there and then try to teach them. And then we found out that it's not just a question of education, it's their whole livelihoods. They don't have any money for, even food, let alone education and health and all that comes later. So that made me question. And the IIT has a very good humanities section, the library that. So you get all these books, Indian philosophy, Western philosophy, whether it's politics, Marx, or whether it's Gandhi or anything. All those books were there. So I started reading all that, trying to understand what is happening. When you enter the IIT Kharagpur, there's a motto that says, dedicated to the service of the nation. So the question is, which nation? There's these upper middle class people like us, all these people, you and I and all these, who are the top 1%, 2%, who are skimming off the cream of the whole country. And there's this other 95, 96% people who are, totally at the margins. Now, at least after the last 20, 30 years, things have improved a little bit. At that time, as I said, poverty levels were very high, 1980s and all that. And I could see that. The hostel where I used to stay, in front of that there was a field in which tribal drivers with bullock carts full of hay, they used to come and wait there for the night, and then the next day they used to go off to the market to sell the hay. The hay belonged to somebody else, some rich fellow. He was selling it in the market, but these guys used to transport that hay there. So one day I, with another friend of mine, we went and talked to these people, what they are doing and all that. So they used to say, we get 2 rupees a day for, carting this stuff, hay there and selling it and things like that. And then I asked them whether they knew what all these buildings were. So they said that, no, we just spend our night out here. So then I explained to him that, look, this building, this is a institute where, people learn to become engineers, this, that, and all that kind of thing to help the nation, whatever. And then on a impulse, I asked that fellow that whether he thought his son could study in this. So then he gave a smile as if I was joking. He said that, how can my son study in this almost 40 years after independence? And you have these people, they can't even dream. They are just at the bottom somehow living. So that had an impact. So I immediately, after that, I decided that I will try and work for this. So that was the story. In India, the indigenous population is the worst in economic terms. If you see their conditions, they are in the worst situation. So that was the choice, that I will work with this set of people who are the most disadvantaged and see if something can be done for them.
Is that the point at which you felt that you had defined a dream for yourself?
Not a dream, actually. Whether it's Gandhian stuff or whether it's Marxian stuff, both of them I found to be, not very viable. So the thing was that I was confused. The only thing that I knew was that something has to be done at the grassroots. That whatever the situation is very bad and something has to be done. What has to be done, that I wasn't clear. So the thing was that I even thought of giving up my studies. But because there was a lot of pressure from home and all that, I managed, I completed my degree. So even in 4th year, I had thought that I would leave. But I didn't do that. I completed my degree. And then after that, I hit the rural area.
What did it comprise of? And was there a period of training of some kind?
There was this organization called Social Work Research Center, which was founded by a person called Sanjeev Roy, popularly known as Bunker Roy. I got in touch with him and he said that yes, you can come and help with our rural development work. So then I went there and there I met a person called Khemraj. He had gone to Alirajpur in Madhya Pradesh to work among the Bhil tribes. So he had come there for some work and we got talking, and then he said that why don't you come, all this is okay, development and all that, but basic thing is you have to fight for rights and things, and we are doing that, so why don't you come and join us? So I said fine. So that's how I came to Alirajpur. And when you talk of training, it's actually training in the field. Whatever I had learned in the IIT to become an engineer, that at that point of time was useless. So I had to learn on the ground, the various problems that those people were facing, the Bhil Adivasis.
I want to know about your acceptance as an outsider.
Actually, by the time I joined this organization in Alirajpur, it had already established itself. That credibility part, that was faced by people before me. So they had one major strike against a contractor who was building a dam and not paying the minimum wages and all that. So all that took place before I had gone there. So it was mostly in my case, the thing was that as a Bengali, my food habits are different, and I suddenly land up in a area where people eat only jawar, bajra, millets and things like that, and that also in very low quantities because they were extremely poor when I went there. Now things have improved, but at that time they sometimes ate only once. So that food thing was there. The other thing was language. At that time they never spoke Hindi. Very few people spoke Hindi. They spoke their own language, really. So I had to pick up the language. So at a personal level, these problems were there. Then that whole area was a hilly area, so there is no transport. So you have to walk all the time, going up and down the hill. So it's a hard life.
Did you have a salary?
No. We didn't have any salary. You spend most of the time with the people. So there are two advantages. One is that your costs go down because they are taking care of your costs, and the other is that because you have such a huge interaction with the people, then the amount of mobilization work that goes up. So that's how it is. Some money used to come from SWRC. The costs used to be as low as possible. Nowadays it's not possible to work like that. So there are various other costs and all that. At time we didn't even have radios, let alone laptops and things like that, and mobile phones and all that. That was not there. So I remember that in 1984 when Indira Gandhi was assassinated, Khemraj told me that for 15 days he didn't know about that because there's no access to any news.
Should we look at that experience as a romantic experience?
My personal case, it's not romantic because I'm not that kind. I told you right from the beginning I have doubts. In fact, when I went there also, I had great doubts about exactly how much we can achieve, given the kind of oppressive structures that are there, and the people, the status of the people. At that time, the people they didn't even know that they were part of a democracy. No, very few people used to vote. First of all, some 10%, 5%. They still thought that they were part of a kingdom, and the earlier king had been replaced, and instead you had the forest department and the police department and the various other government employees. They were like representatives of the king. Actually, in those early part of our work, our main work used to be to try and convince these people that you are part of a democracy. There is a constitution. However flawed that constitution is, but it still has some rights and entitlements, and especially for tribal, for indigenous people, there are some special sections in the constitution, and there are special laws that give them some protection. The romanticism comes in where you want to overthrow the state and things like that. We were not in that. Our thing was that let us try and implement the constitution and various other laws that are there in favor of tribals. And the other aspect was that there are some laws that are inimical to the tribals, like forest laws and things like that. So how to counter those laws? The laws of the state that are against you, you have to fight that. So there's no romanticism in that.
How does your work relate to the changes that have taken place over the last 40 years?
The main thing is that, as I said, that the constitutional provisions, they have begun working. Whatever the positive provisions that are there for the tribes people, not only in our area but throughout the country. So that is one aspect. And the other aspect is that the inimical laws, like the Indian Forest Act, for instance, that has been countered by the Forest Rights Act. This whole problem of Adivasis historically having their cultivation and the community control of the forest, which was taken away by the British. So that has been corrected, this Forest Rights Act. Then the Land Acquisition Act, which was very anti-people, that has been changed. That's gone, and now you have a better act for compensating people and rehabilitating them if they have to be displaced. Then there is something called the Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas Act. So in India, what you have is you have two kinds of scheduled areas. One is in the northeast, which is called the 6th scheduled area. and the rest is the places where we work. Most of the tribes areas in this country, which are the 5th schedule areas. I will not talk about the 6th schedule areas because that's in the northeast. I will just restrict myself to the 5th schedule areas where we work. So in that, there is a provision within the 5th schedule that Adivasis, their traditional hamlets, the Gram Sabhas as they call it, the traditional hamlet, they can control their development. Everything with respect to their development needs and even their policing and education needs, everything they can control. That has become operational. Then there's the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, then the Right to Education Act. All these acts that have come, which give a lot of entitlement to the people. So if you have a strong organization, then you can implement these acts. It's not as if the act is there so it will get implemented. It's not like that. The kind of resources that they can get from the state or even from the market, their bargaining power in the market, that has increased as a consequence of this work that we have done. At a larger level, if you see, this whole thing of development itself, that is problematical on 2 levels. One is the justice aspect, where most of the people don't get paid minimum wages also. And the other aspect is the environment aspect, where, the nature is being devastated. And you have climate change, and now you have COVID and all these kind of things. COVID is just the trailer. However much we say that we are going to control and all that, it's gone. That whatever the golden era of capitalism is now in bad shape because nature has started striking back. So at that level, that we need a different kind of development which respects both the people, gives them a decent wage, and also respects nature, does not harm nature. At that level, we have not been able to do much.
What is your response if someone says that Rahul Banerjee is a socialist?
No, I'm not a socialist, because I try to classify myself as an anarchist, though even that is problematical. The basic thing is that you have to have a bottom-up system. Who are going to take the decisions with regard to the economy? Main thing is the economy. How are you going to run the economy? So at present, the decision is taken in New York. If you see the whole world, it's basically controlled by Wall Street. All the biggest financial institutions are all in Wall Street. So it is they who decide. And the thing is that if you see the world trade, the amount of trade in currencies, just buying and selling the dollar, rupee, yen and all that, that is 20 times the trade in actual goods and services. Now what is this trade in currencies? It is whatever resources that the whole human civilization has accumulated over the years. It started 10,000 years ago when agriculture came and surpluses. Basically, you have to accumulate surplus. If you accumulate surplus, then you can think of multiplying that. If you are just living hand to mouth, you go out and do some hunting and gathering and come back and finish it off, then you cannot, progress. So that became possible with animal husbandry and agriculture 10,000 years ago, which is called the Neolithic Revolution. Now from that time onwards, we have been accumulating resources, and today all that resources is in the banks, and that is being traded all the time. Now the thing is that whatever is traded in currencies, that does not produce any surplus. Actual surplus will come only from goods and services. Somebody makes a laptop or somebody makes a table, then there is some actual addition of value. Somebody sells a stock or a currency for some money and makes some money from that. That does not produce any value. That value has to come from somebody making the table or whatever. This is the system that is there, that is controlled by these financial institutions. And they are the ones who are deciding what is to be done and what is not to be done. Whereas people like us, we are saying that this is a destructive system. It destroys society, it destroys the economy, and it destroys the environment. You have to have a bottom-up system where all these resources you distribute once again. From the banks, you put them back into the people's hands. It's not a question of going back to nature or anything. Not like that. Thing is that there are technologies. You have to decide how to use that technology. Whether that technology, how you will use so that the least amount of harm is done to society and to environment. So you work the other way around. You do not work that you have 1,000 rupees with you. You do not think about how to increase that 1,000 to 1,100 or something like that. Which is how the people in New York in the financial sector, they are not bothered about what is happening. They are just bothered that 1,000 must become 1,100. We, on the other hand, we are saying that don't do it in money terms. You see that person who is living there at the bottom, how can his living improve? And how can nature not be destroyed? For instance, in GDP terms, that joke is there, that if there's a tree standing, then it has no value. When you cut it, then it becomes part of the GDP. So this whole priority has to change. So that is how I see the whole thing.
It seems to me that old labels of socialist, capitalist, nihilist, whatever it is, they're also being disrupted in the current disruption in the world. Is there a name for it, or should we give it a name?
Oh, actually, the thing is that, see, if right from the 1930s, there's nothing called capitalism or socialism. You have a mixture of the two. So if you take the United States also, United States has three forms of government. The federal government is there, then the state governments are there, and then the local governments are there. And the most important work is done by the local government. It provides education free and it provides policing free. This whole thing, this capitalism, socialism and all that become obsolete now. That is why you have concepts like universal basic income and all that coming in. If you take family as the unit, every family must be able to fulfill its potential in terms of education, health and whatever it wants to do. That is one aspect. And the other aspect is nature. There are decentralized, workable, viable, decentralized methods. Only problem is that there is no state support for that. We don't have the power to, convince governments to go for decentralized systems. That is the problem.
At one level, I can think of you having multiple dreams of women's rights, environmental rights and environmental action, the rights of the downtrodden in a socio-political sense. How should we grasp it under one package?
Basically, you have to see in terms of justice, how to formulate this whole thing. So at each and every point, you ask whether whatever you're doing is just or not. So whether it doesn't depend on which community you're working with. It might be women, transgenders or whatever. The thing is that justice should be ensured. And similarly, environmental justice. Whether you are being just towards nature. How are we behaving towards nature? Is our behavior towards nature just towards nature? So that is what I feel. That, all this dreams, this whole concept of dreams and all that, that has been proved to be utopian. Whether it's Marx or Gandhi or whatever, they come up with an ideal kind of a situation that, you must have a society like that and all that. But that doesn't work in practice. So the thing is that you have to ensure justice at every point of time.
Rahul Banerjee, thank you very much for taking the hour with me. Ultimately, as I understand from my conversation with Rahul Banerjee, in the search for solutions, labels lose their meaning. It's all about purpose. Driven by ideologies with names, Banerjee was propelled into serving the poor in India. But hard work on the ground taught him not to chase utopian dreams. Just do the work, persist. Perhaps there is no destination, just the ongoing struggle for betterment. For Media for Change, I'm Sanjeev Chatterjee.